Hi, Mary here from Change is Always Possible. I wanted to share some information with you today that you might not be aware of. And it's from the National Office of Statistics in Scotland. They may do a report every week, and this is called Deaths Involving Coronavirus (COVID-19) in Scotland. And this one is for week 6, which was the 8th to the 14th of February. And I will put a link to that below the video. And the first part of it, we get to our various graphs, and at the top of one of them it says deaths have fallen for 3 consecutive weeks. So that's good news. That's what we want to hear. And in fact, there was a recent high point of deaths in week 3 of the year, which was the 3rd week of January, 18th to the 24th. And since then, we've had falling death rate. And what's interesting about that is that we are being told that it's possibly the vaccine now kicking in and working, and also that the cases are falling. However, if you look further into this report, there's a graph much further down. And on that graph, it shows that it is normal for the death rate to start falling around this time of year. This graph has a line for all deaths. It has a line for the average deaths in the previous 5 years, and it has a line for the COVID-19 deaths. And if you look at the average deaths in the previous 5 years, you can see that over this last period, there's always a peak around about the end of the year, the beginning of the new year, and then the deaths fall away. So in actual fact, perhaps that is what's happening. Rather than vaccines or falling cases, the point about the falling cases is also interesting, because not on these statistics, but if you look at the daily statistics, you can see that they're testing less. And I would like to posit that if we test less, we find less cases. So I think it's worth always looking behind the headlines and looking behind the information, particularly it's being put out by mainstream media like the BBC, because they cherry pick and they don't give you the information in context. So just to go through some more things from this report, which is fascinating. So in week 6, there were 65 fewer deaths in care homes. So that was 22% below the average in care homes. 147 excess deaths at home or in non-institutional settings, which was 46% above the average. And 67 excess deaths in hospital, which was 11% above average. So looking like the vast majority of excess deaths are happening at home or in non-institutional settings, and we've actually got less deaths now in week 6 than we would normally see in care homes. Of course, the deaths in care homes were much, much higher earlier at the beginning of the year. This is a bit that I find absolutely fascinating. So there were 146 excess deaths across all the locations for week 6. But the number of deaths where COVID-19 was the underlying cause was 267. So we've got to ask, how come there are more COVID deaths than the excess deaths? And the reason for that is because, as they state here, deaths from respiratory causes are minus 87. From dementia and Alzheimer's, they're minus 31, and from cancer, they're minus 19. So they were all below average for this time of year. And in actual fact, that has been happening for several weeks now, that the deaths from other causes other than COVID, which you would normally expect to see, are actually below average. What does that mean? I'll let you, hypothesize. There's lots of reasons we could think about that. One, for example, could be that deaths are being recorded as COVID, when in actual fact, previously they might have been recorded as something else. It would be interesting to know, wouldn't it, why that's happening. What else have I got to say here? Oh yeah. So between March 2020 and January 21, 93% of the deaths involving COVID had at least one pre-existing condition. So that's good news for those of us who haven't got any pre-existing conditions, because that means our risk is very, very low. And it actually means whatever age group you're in, your risk is dramatically reduced if you don't have any pre-existing conditions. Let's carry on a little bit further. I'm not going to do much more now. There's all sorts of graphs of death and graphs of where people have died. It is interesting stuff to look at. Let's see. Ooh, they talk about some of the fluctuations you get in death at the beginning of the year. Yeah, again, where the deaths are happening. Then there's a whole section on the underlying causes of death where you can see more clearly. So this is interesting because they look at the deaths by underlying cause of death and location. And this is from week 12 in 2020, so when the pandemic started, right up to week 6. And it is fascinating to me because in hospitals, the excess deaths, for example, from COVID have been 4,598. Now, what's interesting is there have been negative deaths from other causes, and it shows you on this chart that respiratory deaths are down 1,529, circulatory deaths are down 9,309, dementia and Alzheimer's deaths are down 289, and cancer deaths are down by 1,390. So that's in the hospital setting. In care homes, there were less respiratory deaths, less circulatory deaths, less cancer deaths, and more COVID deaths. And what's interesting is at home, there's been a massive increase in deaths. So the excess deaths there are from other, so we don't know what those are, COVID, respiratory, circulatory, dementia and Alzheimer's, and cancer. So there's been a big increase in people, excess deaths at home, big increase in excess deaths in care homes, but a reduction in other deaths, and in hospital, big excess of COVID deaths, and actually rather large reductions in deaths from other causes. It's just fascinating to dig in and think about what it might mean, what might be going on, because I'm not seeing anywhere on the mainstream news any of this information, but it's all there and all crunched for you to have a look at in detail. So that's all I'm saying about it, and I will put a link to the report below the video. Thanks for listening to my musings. Bye.